Let me start recording here. There we go. Yeah, so we're diving into the endocrine system today. And the endocrine system is pretty complex for sure, as you guys dove into as you were studying for the reading quiz. And I know the reading quizzes are probably a little bit stressful when you come into class on Mondays, and I understand that. But like you're so much more set up for class now that you've already looked at all the hormones, you've looked at the glands, and you're gonna get more out of class this week because you've already put some time into that. So believe me that it is for your good, even though it feels stressful. It's going to help you in the end know this stuff. So this is just a cool quote that I love. John Calvin, who yeah, pretty much just saying the creation is just a beautiful way to learn about God, and the splendid house with all of its abundant furnishings will tell us of God. All the pieces tell us of God, and the endocrine system is a cool, complex, and beautiful part of that for sure. So I always like to kind of start us off with like, where have we gone so far in this class, and where are we going, and how did we end up where we're at, and why are we talking about what we're talking about? And so last semester we kind of started with our general cell biology and chemistry, right? Then we kind of took that's kind of the chemical level, and then went into like the cellular level, and then the tissue level, right? And then the main tissues of the body, right, are in the epithelial tissue, the connective tissue, muscle, and then the nervous system, right? But we're talking about the endocrine system. Which tissue is that a part of? You guys remember the glands? What's that part of? I think Ava's got the answer. Your partner, yeah. Which part of those four of the four tissue types in the body? What is the endocrine system a part of? It's a part of the epithelial tissue, right? So the epithelial tissue covers. There's a covering part and then the glandular part. So this is the glandular part of that. So yeah, so we kind of are moving away from the nervous system. This part doesn't apply anymore. I just forgot to change that because we already talked about the autonomic nervous system. We're done with the nervous system now, so we're moving into the endocrine system, which is really the second control system of the body, right? The nervous system is kind of our primary control mechanism, and then the endocrine system is a secondary control mechanism. Okay, let's start out with clicker question here. You can choose more than one. Go ahead, chat about this with your team, decide what you think, and send it in.
Yeah, I was like, wait, I could actually be in here.
You out there, Lex? It's big out there.
I think I'm gonna go out after this class.
Yeah, there's like 50 guys out right now.
I know.
That's insane.
Since I'm shadowing there,
Oh,
to
nice.
get my ID badge, I walk all the way back to my car and look, they spelled my name wrong.
Oh,
it's
said to do it again. Shit. Oh, bummer. Yeah.
My parking got paid.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Nice. All right, send it in. Make sure to hit the send button with this type of question where you can choose more than one. You got to use the send button. Okay. Remember that a couple of you that were like a couple points short on those clicker points, it could have been because of a question like this. And I said, hit the send button, and then you don't. So just make sure you hit the send button. Okay, there we go. That's everybody. All right. Okay, so most of you are saying C and E on there. Okay, so let's talk about this. So neurons release neurotransmitters into the blood. Okay, the problem there is neurons don't release neurotransmitters into the blood. They release them into synapses. Okay, so that one's not right. Endocrine glands release neurotransmitters into the blood. They don't release neurotransmitters, they release hormones. Okay, endocrine glands release hormones into the blood. That one is correct. Okay, so the definition of a hormone is these two things, that it's released from a gland and it's released into the blood. That's what makes it a hormone. Okay? It could be the same chemical, that's released by something else, but we wouldn't call it a hormone at that point. So it's all about what releases it and where it releases it into. And then neurons release hormones into the blood. That one is also true, actually. We'll talk about one example of that in a second. And then the third one, neurons release neurotransmitters into synapses. That one's true as well. Okay, so the definition of a neurotransmitter is that it's released from a neuron into a synapse. This one is the one that's kind of in between the two, right? And so that's part of what's called the neuroendocrine system. When it's a neuron releasing a hormone into the blood, our adrenal gland is an example of that, like epinephrine. When epinephrine or adrenaline gets released into the blood, that's actually neurons releasing that into the blood. Okay, questions on that at all? Okay, so let's kind of just break down the idea of these three control mechanisms in the body. So the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the neuroendocrine system. Okay, so in the nervous system, the cell doing the releasing is a neuron. In the endocrine system, the cell doing the releasing is a gland. Okay, in the neuroendocrine, the cell doing the releasing is a neuron. Okay, when it comes to what the chemical is called that it's releasing, in the nervous system, it's called a neurotransmitter. In the endocrine system, it's called hormone. In the neuroendocrine system, a lot of people call them neurohormones, but a lot of times they're just called hormones as well. But the same chemical, so for example, norepinephrine can be released from a neuron into the blood, and it can be a neurohormone, or it could also be released from a neuron into a synapse, and then it would be called the neurotransmitter. So the chemical itself doesn't necessarily define what it is. But yeah, Kieran? That's kind of what I said on the previous question. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
On the clicker question?
Like that is important.
Yeah, I wouldn't make it so it was yeah, I see what you're saying, but I wouldn't try to trick you like that. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Come on, Kieran, you can trust me. You had me all last semester. If you called me out on it and it was unfair, I would give you the points back. Gotcha. Okay. All right. So what's it released into? The nervous system releases into a synapse. Okay. Endocrine system releases into the blood. Neuroendocrine releases into the blood. Okay. What kind of tissue does the chemical bind to or interact with? The target tissue in the nervous system can be another neuron. That's the most common, like in our brain, in our spinal cord. It could be muscle, right? Include cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or skeletal muscle. Okay. Or it could be a gland, salivary gland, the glands we talked about in the eyes, right? Could be an endocrine gland that it's controlling as well. Okay. In the endocrine system, any cell in the body that has a receptor for that thing can be the target tissue. Neuroendocrine is the same way. If it ends up in the blood, then it can get anywhere in the body, right? We don't have to have a neuron directly connecting to it like we do with the nervous system, if it goes into the blood. Okay, the signal type with the nervous system is all frequency modulated. We've talked about this, right? We don't have difference in height of these action potentials. We have difference in frequency of how many are arriving, and that dictates the strength of the signal. In the endocrine system, it is more about amplitude, right? Like how strong of a signal is about how much of that hormone is released. Yeah. Okay, and then it's kind of a combo of the two with neuroendocrine. The frequency at the neuron dictates the amount of the hormone released, and then the amount of the hormone released kind of dictates the signal strength. So it's kind of a combo of the two. Okay, the time course is going to be with the nervous system, we can activate something and then deactivate it right away, right? Turn it on, turn it off. Okay. With the endocrine system, we can't do that because we just put a bunch of that chemical into the blood and now it's just out there, right? So it has to get either broken down in some way or get dealt with by our kidneys or something else or just kind of fall apart. So it's not working anymore, right? So it's a slow on because that's to circulate through the body and then slow off too, because it's got to get broken down. And then same thing with neuroendocrine because it's in the blood. And then the actions of the nervous system are very direct, right? It's like a direct signal going to one specific tissue, doing something to it, right? In the endocrine system, it's very general because it just goes through the whole body and activates a bunch of things or deactivates a bunch of things. Same thing with neuroendocrine, also general. Yeah, Ava?
Adrenaline, sometimes it takes a while for it to hit you, so like then after, so it's after whatever happened, then you start to shake.
Mm. Yeah, it is a bit, that is definitely related to that, that you may have this fear response. And yeah, you might not feel it right away. You feel scared right away, but then yeah, you're shaky. Part of that is related to the fact that yes, it took a while to get out in your bloodstream, but then secondly, it's still floating around out there. And if you're already kind of past the stressful situation, but you're just like sitting there, then you have all this adrenaline out there, and you're not actually like dispelling of it, any of it, like running or doing something, right? So you're like resting, but you have a lot of adrenaline in your system, so it's kind of like activating you, but you're not even really moving to like activate with it. If that makes sense. Yeah, Ethan.
It's like an EpiPen, it's pretty quick, and it's intramuscular.
Yeah,
Is that, because that seems like really quick. Like,
it is. Yeah,
Spreadsheets like that's like.
yeah, it's still quick. It's still quick for sure. Yeah, it's epinephrine, just like your adrenal medulla releases, and yeah, it diffuses into your blood really quickly and then gets pumped through pretty rapidly. But it still takes a little time.
Instant. That one is a second.
Yeah, I mean, not a sec, maybe, yeah, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds or something to a minute to really kind of get through your whole body. Um, about every minute. So your typical cardiac output at rest is 5 liters per minute, right? And your blood volume is about 5 liters as well. So about every minute, your whole blood circulates through your body, right? So that's kind of it, so about at least half of it is probably spread through your body in 30 seconds, right? And then the other half would be there after a minute. And then your heart rate is probably elevated already, so that would make it go faster too and more cardiac output. But yeah, good question. Yeah, and so yeah, we'll talk about what an EpiPen does, but it just pretty much reverses that all the dilation you have in your blood vessels because we know the sympathetic nervous system will constrict instead, right? So it's kind of just reversing the opposite of that. So, did you have a question too, Karen? Sure, like everything we've been talking about with the autonomic nervous system, like changing the size of our pupil, right? So constricting our pupil, dilating our pupil, right? So it's kind of, we're just like for that pupillary dilator muscle, right? We're just pulling open the pupil. That's it. That was the effect right there, right? Yeah, good question. Good. Other questions? Okay, so you guys should be able to handle this image pretty easily here. You probably mostly filled it out, so maybe we can just walk through it. But actually, I'll give you a couple minutes just to think about this part that you maybe haven't thought about yet, which is which of these glands. And this one is strange. It looks like it's just pointing to his eye for some reason. I don't know, but it's supposed to be pointing to the one where this bigger black line is pointing to that I had to add. But yeah, go through these glands, make sure you have the names. And then the part that maybe you haven't done yet is which one would be a purely endocrine gland, which one would be a neuroendocrine gland, and then which one would also have some exocrine functions too, which means releasing something into the digestive tract or the reproductive tract. Any tract that's continuous with the outside of the body would be exocrine. So take a sec, just check with your team on these. Yeah. Um, they're not. Good question though. Yeah.
First one. And then like thyroid. And then I think that one would probably be a part of the neuro.
Natalie, can I talk to you real quick after class? Yeah. Yes.
The posterior, the
Yeah.
neuroendocrine, and then the anterior endocrine.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So you've done some work on that slide.
Yeah.
I like it. All right, let's come back together here. Okay, so we'll start from the top there. What's that one set of our brains there? Pineal gland, okay. And that one is neuroendocrine, okay. It's really like directly in the center of our brain. It's all neurons. But it's going to release into the blood, okay. And then going down from there, we got kind of the master of the endocrine system. What would that one be? Hypothalamus. Yeah, this is also neuroendocrine. Okay, and then that one directly controls the one below, which is the pituitary gland. Okay, and so with the pituitary gland, we got the two parts, right? We got the anterior part, which is endocrine, and then the posterior part, which is neuroendocrine. We'll talk more about those three. Yeah, the hypothalamus and the pituitary more on Wednesday. And then from there, we go down to our thyroid gland. Okay, thyroid gland is purely endocrine. It's the biggest purely endocrine gland in the body. Then we got the parathyroid, as you guys already talked about, and we saw today in the quiz. That one's also purely endocrine. Okay, the one that wraps around our trachea down low there. What's that one? Thymus. Yeah, this one's endocrine as well. It's really connected to our immune system. And then we already talked about the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are interesting as well because there's the medulla, the part in the center, which is neuron. So that's the neuroendocrine part. That's the part that releases epinephrine into our blood. And then there's the endocrine part, which is the cortex, the adrenal cortex, which is the outside part, which is more endocrine. Okay, so yeah, that part, adrenal medulla, is neuroendocrine. Adrenal cortex is endocrine. Okay, what's that next one there? Pancreas. Yeah, and the pancreas releases hormones, so it has an endocrine portion, but it also releases a bunch of digestive enzymes too, right? So that's the exocrine part as well, right? So a bunch of things that get released into the digestive tract, which doesn't fit any of those definitions we talked about before, right? Digestive tract's considered outside of the body because it's continuous with the outside of the body. Okay, and then we've got the two gonads here. So in females is ovary, males the testes. Okay, these are also a mix of endocrine and exocrine. Because of the hormones they release, it's endocrine, but then because of other materials they release, we'll talk about in the next week, I think we'll get into the reproductive systems. Anything released into the reproductive tract is also considered exocrine because it is continuous with the outside of the body. Okay, questions on any of these? Do you guys have it all mostly down from your studies? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, today is mostly just kind of an overview of the endocrine system and how it works. And so we'll spend some time just kind of orienting ourselves with how it all works overall. Okay. So the big idea with the endocrine system is that we've got start over here. Okay. So we've got an endocrine cell over here. So this will be like a collection of cells that makes up the gland, right? So this could be the anterior pituitary. Okay. And this is just one of those cells in the anterior pituitary. And in glands like that release a bunch of different ones, there's certain cells that only release one hormone. So there's a bunch of cells in the anterior pituitary that only make and release growth hormone. And there's a bunch of other cells that only make and release FSH, and a bunch of other cells that release LH. And that's just kind of how it works. You have like kind of pockets of cells that do that one task in the gland. Yeah. In the pancreas, yeah, the islets of Langerhans. Yeah, well, even within that, though, you've got the islets of Langerhans. That's the endocrine part, and then you've got within that you have different types of cells too. The A cells and the B cells, and different ones. So the beta cells or the B cells, the ones that make insulin. The A cells, the ones that make glucagon. So you've kind of got still, yeah. And then you have the other part of the pancreas that's releasing the exocrine portion, totally different sets of cells. Yeah. Yeah, so the idea is these cells are making a certain hormone, releasing it. It always goes into the interstitial space first, which is that's no man's land, right? Kind of not in the cell, not in the blood vessel. That space between, that it diffuses into the bloodstream, and then it can go. And this would always be happening in a capillary bed, right? You can see all the little cells behind the capillary bed. hormone gets into the capillary bed, and then it can go through the bloodstream, but it'll get pumped back to the heart first, right? Heart's going to pump it out via the aorta eventually to another capillary bed where it can diffuse out of the blood and then go find a receptor that it can bind to, and bind to that receptor and have an effect on that cell, right? So that's kind of basic idea of endocrine or neuroendocrine. If it was neuroendocrine, we would just switch out these endocrine cells with neurons instead, right? And they're releasing into that spot. Okay, so a few things about how we talk about the endocrine system. And so this idea of stimulation or inhibition, okay, when we think about something is stimulated by something or something is inhibited by something, we would say that we would inhibit, what we say, and this is kind of for you guys to think about, which of these ones would make sense if we inhibit an organ or a gland, stimulate an organ or gland, a hormone, or release of hormones. Take a quick second and see what you think about that. You can also look at this one. When we say something is released, which one would it be? Organ, gland, hormones, okay? Take a quick sec, circle the ones you think, check with your teammates real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a. Sounds like. So this is. I mean, what I did is said, no, stimulating the release.
Okay, let's talk about this real quick here. So what is stimulated or inhibited? So we could say that a gland is stimulated or an organ is stimulated to do something, okay? We wouldn't say that a hormone is stimulated or inhibited, but we could say the release of that hormone is stimulated or inhibited, right? So those two make sense. The hormone itself doesn't, okay? When we talk about the release, what do we say is released? Hopefully not our organs or glands, not dumping out any of those, but the hormones obviously are the things being released, right? Okay, and then kind of how we put these sentences together would be something like this. So a hormone, we could plug in whatever hormone we want that would make sense, is going to stimulate the release of another hormone, okay, which then from a gland. Okay, so we're stimulating the release of a hormone, right? And the hormone itself can do the stimulating, right? But it's not stimulated itself, right? A hormone can stimulate something, but we can't stimulate a hormone, if that makes sense. Okay. And then we could also say a hormone inhibits the release of another hormone from a gland, right? But then we have quite a few hormones that are stimulating hormones. They do the stimulation, right? And so they're going to be named according to the gland that they stimulate to release something, not necessarily according to the hormone that they cause the release of, right? Okay, and then we also have releasing and inhibiting hormones, and these hormones are named according to the hormone whose release they affect. So for example, we have follicle stimulating hormone, right? FSH. Okay, so that is a hormone that stimulates the gland, which is the gland in that case is the follicle, which is the cells around the egg in the ovaries. Okay, but then we also have releasing or inhibiting hormones. So we have growth hormone inhibiting hormone, GHIH, or growth hormone releasing hormone, and so those are obviously inhibiting or releasing inhibiting or stimulating the release of growth hormone. Okay, questions on that one at all? It'll make more sense when we start looking at them too. Okay, go ahead. Choose the one here that the sentence structure is correct. And check with your teammates. Talk it through. Make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, see, yeah. So, yeah, like, has something to do with minerals and chemicals, that's all. I think it's like, what, it like helps with your mineral balance?
Aldosterone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. It's a mineral corticoid. So yeah, it's exactly. It helps with sodium and potassium balance.
So.
Mhm.
We're confused by English language.
But the English language is a tough one, yeah. I know, right? It is tricky, yeah. That's why we actually spend some time with it, because it feels like basic, then it's like you start trying to do it, it's like, oh wait, it is tricky,
Like-
actually, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, send in your answer if you haven't yet. 3 more people still need to send it in. Okay, I'll leave it open for a sec, so the last 2 of you can still send it in. But most of you are saying B is the correct answer. Okay, so B, angiotensin 2 is a hormone. Hormones can stimulate the release of another hormone, like aldosterone, from the adrenal gland. Okay, so B is the correct one. We can look at the other ones real quick. Angiotensin 2 stimulates the release of the adrenal gland. Nope, don't release our glands. Okay. Aldosterone is released by the stimulation of angiotensin 2. No, we don't stimulate a hormone, right? And then the adrenal glands don't do the stimulating, right? So the adrenal gland stimulates the release of aldosterone from angio, and hormones don't do the releasing either, right? So that's not that one either. Okay, questions on that? Okay, so let's talk about some other basic concepts here. So how do we control the secretion of hormones? So there's kind of 3 primary ways. So the first one's called humoral stimulus. Humoral just means like fluid. Okay. And so this is like the level of a certain substance in our body fluid dictates the release of a hormone from a gland. Okay. So that means that gland is probably has some kind of chemoreceptors on it where it's measuring the release or the level of that chemical that it's looking for, and then deciding how much to release of the hormone that it releases. Okay, that's humoral stimulus. Neural stimulus is when a neuron just directly stimulates a gland to release something. Okay, so it's like a neuron touches that gland and controls it. Okay, we have a lot of that in the top part here, right up in our brain, right? And then the hormonal stimulus is real common too. This is where we have one hormone causes the release of another one. Okay, and so we have 2 different terms here that are important to know. Tropic hormones, without the H, tropic hormones stimulate a gland to release another hormone. So this is not the right there. I don't know how I hadn't seen that. But so another gland is their target is what it's supposed to be like, the possessive there. But yeah, so in this case, that we're always thinking about what target tissue is that hormone trying to go to. In this case, it's just going directly to that other gland and causing the release of another hormone. Okay, so tropic hormones are that way, but then some tropic hormones and some non-tropic hormones cause growth in the gland that they bind to. And so if a hormone causes growth in a gland, then you just add that little H. It's a trophic hormone. Okay. Hypertrophy. How many of you going for hypertrophy in the gym? Some of you, right? This means growth, right? You're making your muscles bigger, right? So same idea. Trophic hormones cause growth of a gland. Okay. And then we have a lot of negative feedback loops when it comes to hormonal stimulus. Okay. So high levels of one hormone, um, usually like the last hormone that's released in a chain, that one will usually go back up to the top and tell the previous hormones to stop releasing because there's enough of that one that was being released at the end. We'll look at a couple examples of those. Okay. So examples of these things. Yeah, so this one, go ahead. You can do this one on the clickers. Just check with your teammates first. So kind of walk through that. We got the hypothalamus to the pituitary and then the target organs. You can kind of see hormone release caused by another hormone. Yeah, go ahead. Decide which one of those options there on the bottom right of the screen, if you can't see it in the back. Check with your teammates real quick before you send it. Actually, just go ahead and look at the next two slides as well. That gives you all the examples, but just answer this one. So look at all three of those, but just send this one in on your clickers. There's two more slides that have examples like this as well. All right, looks like we got everybody for this first one, and everybody is pretty much saying B. Okay, so this one is the hormonal stimulus, right? So the hormone release is caused by another hormone. And in that case, it would be a trophic hormone. If it also makes the gland grow, it'd be a trophic hormone. And so we have lots of examples of that in this chain between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. But then the pituitary, a lot of times, will send another hormone to connect to another gland. So these are three examples of that right here, where we have the hypothalamic hormone is first. It causes release of an anterior pituitary hormone. And then some of those go to the thyroid gland, some of those go to the adrenal, some go to the gonads. Okay, so yeah, this one is hormonal. Okay, and then here, next we've got hormone release caused by certain levels of ions in the blood or nutrients. Okay, this is the humoral one. Okay, so parathyroid and thyroid hormones are all about calcium levels. So they have to do with bone development. We'll talk about that later. Insulin and glucagon are related to which thing in the blood? Glucose, yeah, blood sugar. And those are both released from the pancreas. So the pancreas is kind of monitoring the level of glucose in the blood. If we have too much, it'll release insulin. If we don't have enough, it'll release glucagon. Oops. Okay, you guys get on that one? Okay, and then we've got the last one here, the neural stimulus. So this is common in a place like the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla has neurons that go directly to it, and those are the things doing the releasing right into the blood. But we could also have this one back here, this first example of the hypothalamus kind of having neurons that go down into the posterior pituitary. Those are neurons just releasing directly into the blood as well. So that'd be another example of neural stimulus as well. So here's our example. We got stress. That's going to activate our sympathetic nervous system, right? That's going to cause the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine from the adrenal medulla. And so that's our neural stimulus. Okay. Questions about any of these? Okay, so then we got feedback loops. Okay, so the typical in the body is a negative feedback loop where one hormone is going to inhibit the release of another. And we can have kind of two levels of this. We can have a short negative feedback loop where the first hormone inhibits the release of the second one um, yeah, that it interacts with. Okay. And then that second hormone inhibits the release. Sorry, that's not right. I was confusing myself. First hormone isn't, it doesn't inhibit, but it stimulates the release of the second one. Right, but then that second one goes back and blocks the release of the first one. So an example of that would be right here. The hypothalamus releases something. It tells the anterior pituitary to release something. And then that anterior pituitary hormone goes back and tells the hypothalamus, stop, we got enough of that one now. Okay, so that's like short negative feedback. But then the longer version of that is first hormone stimulates the release of a second one, second hormone stimulates the release of a third one, and then that third one goes back and blocks the release of the first one. So again, we can go here, hypothalamus causes pituitary to release something, pituitary releases something, goes to the thyroid gland. The thyroid hormones then come all the way back and inhibit up here. So that'd be a long negative feedback loop. Okay. In some cases, we have positive feedback. And so examples, so the idea there is the initial release of a hormone stimulates further release of that same hormone. Okay. One example of this is during labor. Oxytocin causes contraction of the uterus. Okay. And so with a big rush of oxytocin that happens during labor, that actually causes more oxytocin to be released from the posterior pituitary, and it causes all those really intense contractions. Okay. Estrogen as well for ovulation. We'll talk about that when we get into the female reproductive system. It's normally causes negative feedback for LH and FSH, but right around ovulation time, it kind of reaches a tipping point where there's so much estrogen, it then causes a big rush of LH, which is going to cause ovulation. So, okay, but those exact examples, sorry, this is, you can go ahead and write this in. Just TRH would be the example of the hypothalamic hormone there. And then TSH would be the example of the anterior pituitary hormone being released there. TRH and TSH. But we'll deal with all those on Wednesday as well. Okay, a couple different things about the patterns of secretion. Okay, so some hormones are just, we need them all the time and they need to be maintained. Their level needs to be maintained all the time in our blood. Okay, so examples of this would be our thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones control our metabolism, and we need to have them pretty much at a somewhat of a high level all the time. It can fluctuate a bit, but it needs to stay up. We can also have acute release patterns, which means that hormones might spike at certain times based on a stimulus. Okay, so an example of that would be calcitonin. When we have really high calcium levels in our blood, we release calcitonin. That helps us deal with that. Okay, when we start exercising or do some other kind of stress, that spikes epinephrine in our blood. So it's another example of a spike in a hormone based on a stimulus. Okay, and then other hormones are cyclical, where we have this kind of regular pattern of release. And this usually is controlled by our brain in some way. And so cortisol is supposed to spike for us a little bit before we wake up. But that all depends on enough sleep and on a regular pattern of sleep. It's probably not a lot of that going on in this classroom, typically. College students is not your strong suit. But if you do get enough sleep and you kind of have a regular pattern, it's a lot easier to wake up because you got cortisol release coming out right before you wake up, and it's stressful on your body waking up. You guys know that, and cortisol helps with that stress. And then estrogen as well, the different fluctuations in estrogen through the menstrual cycle, which we'll talk about next week. Okay, everybody got that? Okay, we can just walk through these together because we're running out of time. So the chronic one would be A. Okay, so we see little fluctuations in it, but not much, right? It stays elevated, goes up and down a little bit, but not much. And then we've got acute versus cyclic. The only difference is the stimulus, right? So when there's a stimulus that causes the spike, that's what makes it acute. When it just spikes kind of from more of like an internal stimulus, like our brain is controlling it based off of certain patterns, then that is cyclic. Okay, a couple other terms here that are important. So permissiveness, the idea of permissiveness is one hormone needs the presence of another hormone to do its job. Okay, so a good example of that is growth hormone and thyroid hormone. Growth hormone obviously causes growth, and it does that by causing protein synthesis in our cells. But if we don't have enough energy being produced in our cells, then we can't do protein synthesis. So the thyroid hormones make us produce energy, they drive our metabolism, and then growth hormone drives the growth. Synergism is a little bit different. It's two hormones that do the same thing, that act together and kind of have a doubling effect. All right, so this is common for glucose control in our blood. So epinephrine causes us to raise our glucose levels, and glucagon does too. So they can both act, and then we get a stronger increase in glucose when they're both on board. And then antagonism is the opposite of that, where two hormones doing the opposite thing. So insulin and glucagon are a perfect example of that. Insulin lowers our blood sugar, glucagon raises our blood sugar. Growth hormone is anabolic, causes us to grow. Cortisol is catabolic, it causes us to break down tissue. Okay, and then just real quick on the what the three primary chemicals that make up hormones. Okay, so hormones can be kind of amino acids that are just modified slightly. Those are very common. Okay, examples of those would be these: epinephrine, norepinephrine, thyroid hormones, serotonin. These are very common, also known as amine hormones. Some hormones are fully formed proteins. Okay, both of these are typically going to bind to a receptor of some sort on the outside of the cell. With protein hormones, examples of those would be thyrotropin releasing hormone, calcitonin, parathyroid, oxytocin. We'll see all these hormones again when we get to those parts. And then the other big group is steroid hormones. Steroid hormones don't bind to a receptor outside of the cell. They get inside of our cells and bind to an intracellular receptor that directly starts transcription, and that's going to lead to protein synthesis. And so examples of those, sorry, hold on, would be estrogen, cortisol, testosterone, progesterone. These are all examples of steroid hormones. And the key is that they're derived from cholesterol. That's the big thing. So they're made up of fats, right? So they're made in the smooth ER instead of the rough ER where proteins are made. All right, guys, I'll leave it up for a sec. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Bye, bro. Well, yeah. Hold on one sec. Let me